morning, everyone. It is Friday, which means you're here watching us live at Gateway Office Hours, just like we have been for every week for the last 49 weeks. But we're doing something a little bit special this week. We have our live studio audience. All right, we got a camera switch. There we go. Hey, say hey, everyone. I don't know.
That is packed, Ben.
Is there a different word for audience? Audience seems a little bit of a misnomer. Peanut gallery. Is
Peanut
that okay?
gallery? I was going to say writers of the show.
Writers of the show. All right.
Yeah.
We're doing this live, where we're going to be taking their questions and giving them our opinions and what you might call answers. If you want to send in your own questions, you can hit us up on Twitter or in the Facebook comments at GTWI Inc., Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. If you're watching the recording of this or the podcast, good on you. Catch us live at oh.gtwi.co every Friday morning.
Good job. You got all the things.
I did all the things this time.
Yeah. Is there any news?
It only took 49 weeks for me to get there.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. You guys, any
Is there
news?
Jawbone's going to close.
Jawbone.
It's not cannabis news, but it's, startup-y kind of news.
Yeah, startup-y. They
sort of.
rise and
The rise
of a
and,
titan.
yeah. And Mass Roots and Alan Brockstein are in a battle.
Yeah. I want to stay out of
That's
that.
That's some gossipy news. But
It's
is there,
gossipy
guys?
news.
Is there any news?
Alameda.
Do you want to talk about Alameda?
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure what you wanted to say on camera about Alameda.
So-
Well, I'm kind of bashful, and you guys know I don't like to talk a lot. But
name?
You want to say who you are? Yeah.
oh, sure. Rich Moskowitz from Alameda, from the Lanai Club, and Tuesday night the mayor put forward a resolution to not only lift the cannabis growing ban, but the dispensary ban.
Wow.
And at the same point, her referral also directed the city to come back in early September with complete regulations to move forward immediately, which then goes to the city council to vote. But from the words of Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can do anything, because people for months told me that Alameda is the wasteland of cannabis, and not in a good way. But basically, people got together, worked with their politicians and their elected officials and the community, and we moved forward. And not to say that the fight's over by any means, it's just beginning, but the city council had a referral put forward by a council member a year ago that was basically low to medium priority. And the mayor's referral that went through Tuesday night after a 6-hour meeting changed the city to very high priority and moving forward immediately with even the more controversial things for the Alameda community, or potentially controversial for any community, of active retail and medical dispensaries.
What was holding it up? Like, is it just the demographics of Alameda don't want cannabis around, or what's the?
Actually, that's strange, because 80,000 people in Alameda, roughly 66% voted for Prop 64 statewide. Alameda's numbers are close to 70%. I'm sorry, 56 statewide and 66 Alameda. Our demographic, people think of us as really old, is actually changed quite a bit. And the one thing that brings all Alamedans together is this somehow odd notion that we like to do business on Alameda, we like to earn our money in Alameda, and we have a hard time leaving the island. And so therefore, that's every reason why cannabis by Alamedans for Alamedans. And the council members now, who have to be responsive to every facet of the community, are starting to see that a lot of this community is starting to get together. So the first group that was created was Alameda Island Citizens Committee, or Cannabis Community, excuse me, and now there's a second group created, Alamedans for Safe Cannabis Access, and soon there might even be a third, Alameda Citizens Movement. And as good politicians, they're being responsive.
Well, so this is super interesting, and for anyone that's not based in the Bay Area, Alameda is historically a pretty conservative city. It's kind of older, sleepier feeling.
It's the suburbs across the water.
It is, yeah. It's a small island outside of Oakland. Anyways, for the longest time, we just thought that cannabis had no chance, but now that it does, it's super interesting because there's all this light manufacturing industrial land out there. It's an old Army base or naval base.
Yeah.
And you're talking about big buildings that could, hold a lot of manufacturing, and they already have kind of this reputation for cultivating alcohol production, food production, and so if we get cannabis production in there, it's going to be a really nice fit. And so you're talking, potentially hundreds of thousands of square feet of manufacturing and potentially cultivation space.
So the base is a unique aspect. The base comes with a lot of rules. The city's the landlord. There's a lot going on at the base. Certainly, as you mentioned, several breweries, several wineries. When one looks at that space and you see an 80,000 square foot empty building, you're like, seems like cultivation to me.
Yeah.
Cultivation is definitely on the agenda. All activities are on the agenda. The city's looking into that. Certainly, there's a lot of businesses that are in Alameda, and we're finding out more and more about that every day. And they would love to have permits and be able to stay in Alameda. But the base is a unique thing, and it's really great timing right now. You might have seen this in the news. The main developer of the base for housing has been going back to the city and asking for more and more and more, saying that the project can't make sense anymore economically. And so, and there's a lot to it. I don't want to.
So it's not like something like a high margin plant might make sense.
That's where I'm going, exactly. So, and also it keeps things isolated. Alameda is 3 separate areas: East End, West End, and the base in a lot of ways. So there's so much potential, and not to dominate time or anything, the city council members, I hope, would all recognize it. 4 out of the 5 of them voted to move forward. And in September, I encourage everyone who's interested in this issue to come to the September 5th council meeting and support cannabis in Alameda.
Awesome.
Interesting. Great.
Thanks for the update. Is there any other news, cannabis news that anyone wants to share? I don't know if there is any that happened. No. Everyone's shaking their head.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Great.
What do we do now, Ben? You're in charge of this.
I'm in charge. So we're going to jump straight into it. Basically, what I want to do today is give everyone a little bit of time to ask questions that are pertinent to their business. We'll get them, obviously, here on camera, and we'll just kind of go for it.
All right. Anyone have questions? Princessa, you're in charge of the mic.
You guys can't be shy, I can tell you that.
All right. Are we all
Okay,
good?
so my business is really facility optimization, and one of the questions I have is simply how to become more involved with operators that actually are interested in efficiency in the cannabis industry.
So operators, and by operators, you're meaning cultivators, basically. Right. They're historically not on LinkedIn, shall we say, right? They're kind of in the shadows intentionally. There's organizations you can join to get to them, but the question is really, and actually, Wes, you and I spoke about this the other day. Like, cultivators are not traditionally have not been. I don't want to paint them all with a broad brush, but they've traditionally not been first adopters of new technology. That's not necessarily how they've made their money and built their businesses. So, personally, I think you would probably have more success. And Ben might disagree, but I think you'd probably have more success going after people who are setting up facilities for new people who are setting up facilities rather than kind of legacy people who are already operating. I don't think they're going to worry about efficiency too much until price compression starts to happen, and then they'll start freaking out that they can't sell for as much as they used to. But my intuition there is that it's the newer people who are setting up new facilities that are your kind of initial target, because they are already kind of thinking long term about price compression, and they're willing to kind of put the capital in to build out a more efficient facility from the beginning. I don't know.
That's a great point. And if you are targeting your kind of initial market, that makes total sense. If you're into this point where you're trying to expand and you're trying to expand those different revenue streams, really kind of understanding what the needs of the customers are and the different customer bases. So there are the ones that they couldn't care less about efficiency for efficiency's sake, but they do care about their bottom line. And so if your efficiency building saves them 30% a month, that's pretty convincing. Even Wes would be interested in that.
Even Wes. Wow, that was a dig. I was actually going to ask you for your opinion on it, but Ben just decided to just go there. No, I mean, I think being able to communicate clearly that this is true for any business, though, right? No one cares about your business; they care about making money, basically. So you got to show them how you're going to make them more money. I think with cultivators, you might even consider adopting a different business model where that they don't have to risk a lot. I'm not totally familiar with the details of your solution, but I've seen people who are doing, for example, power efficiency, and basically instead of charging an upfront fee where people come in and buy their equipment and install it, they basically say, like, I'll take over your electric bill and I'll charge you less than what you pay now, and I'll make the difference because I'm not going to use much electricity as much as you are because I've got this more efficient system. Like, let me go in and do it, and there's basically nothing up front, and they eat. It's an arbitrage play. That might cost a little bit more upfront for you, but it's an easy way for someone who's kind of not convinced to kind of test the market. It's like, okay, well, if you're just going to come in and lower my electricity bill, what do I have to lose, right?
Yeah, we do offer 0% finance.
You do. Okay, so it's kind of similar to that.
There's no
Yeah.
risk in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, how does this answer sit with you, though? I mean, I feel like maybe we're not getting to the
I think
issue.
the point of the new facilities it was really interesting. And then, yes, I agree entirely with some people are not focused on efficiency. They just want to know the numbers, and like see this as a profit center. Because some people don't think of savings as an income builder, but it hits the bottom line the same way.
Yeah.
Right, so you need to be able to communicate that to them very clearly. Wes, I do want to ask you, like, what are your thoughts? You know a hell of a lot of growers and have been a grower yourself.
I'll compare this sort of to LED lighting. People have been pushing LED lighting for the last 10 or 15 years, but it wasn't up until the last, I'll say 6 months, that most of the growers that I've seen in the hills are really starting to look at LEDs. When things first came out, there was obvious differences in quality between LED and high pressure sodium. So nobody was ever going to change off the HIDs, the high intensity discharge lighting that we've had in the past. They didn't care how much electricity it took, and they didn't care how much heat it put off, simply because it gave them the production yield that they were expecting. To get people to change that mindset, there has to be a lot of really hardcore analytical data backing it. To get so my wife works for the USDA. She works with farmers that do cattle ranching. And these guys have been doing the same cattle practices for 300 years. They've learned it from grandpa to grandpa to grandpa. And to get someone to change an agricultural practice that has been proven solid and proven to work, it's really, really hard, and it's a hands-on basis. Like, I would suggest actually going up into Humboldt County for a month or two, meeting with people, do the politician, shake hands, kiss babies, tell them how much money that you can save them, and then find someone to let you prove it. And as soon as one farmer is saying, yeah, I saved $30,000 on my electric bill this year, the whole town of Arcata is going to be knocking on your door.
Interesting. And, LED lighting is also, I think it has come, there's been changes, right? It's come a long way. When it first came out, it actually had a lot more problems in terms of producing quality than it does now. You can have a wider spectrum, and you can there's differences to LED lighting now that maybe it wasn't a good idea for them to adopt it early, but they need to kind of relook at it.
Well, when LEDs first came out, they had really low PAR values, which is photoaccepted radiation. And now that they've realized that it's not how bright the light is, but how intense it is, they've been able to twerk and tweak, the
they
LEDs.
Twerk, do they?
To
Is that what's going on in Humboldt?
they've been able to tweak
there?
the LED lighting into the not only the proper spectrums, but to the proper intensity of discharge that it needs to produce full flower formations. So.
Cool. You make a really good point about cattle, though, and just like farming in general, right? I think a lot of times I'm guilty of this too, right? Because I can get excited about new technology, and to me, I'll know, I know this works. It's a no-brainer. You should totally do this. I know it works, right? But you're talking to someone who's got, they're making millions of dollars a year on a very stable, well understood method, and if you were wrong, they're not you, so they're not in your brain. All they know is like, here's this person telling me they know it works, right? And the risk to them might be enormous. If it doesn't work, you could put them out of business, right? And so just to kind of have that, wear the customer's hat for a minute and understand, like, you might know it's better, but they're risking a lot if you really think about it.
I think I just want to chisel out an important takeaway. If there is anyone out there that is focusing on selling to growers, or basically anyone that's been steeped into the cannabis industry for a long time, recognize that your sales cycle might be a lot longer than you expect it to be. And that if you're coming to people like us and you're pitching your business, you need to have vetted that out pretty thoroughly. Like, you need to understand your customer and understand what that sales cycle is going to be, because can your business survive for 8 months while you're trying to make your first sale?
That's a great point, especially for people who are coming from the tech world, because we're in a little bit of a bubble in the tech world where if you've got a new app, it's relatively easy to convince people to try it, or a new even B2B SaaS-based platform. It's like people are willing to try things. They've got IT departments that'll try stuff. Actually, Wes, when you were describing how Humboldt County worked, I was actually reminded of Latin America. If you've ever done business in Latin America, it's very similar of like, I don't care about anything except for how well I know you, right?
Exactly.
It's like, if I don't know you, I don't give a shit what you're doing.
Doesn't matter how much money you bring,
right?
or what
That's
you bring
right.
to the table. If I haven't known you since I was yee-high to a grasshopper, and you grew up three
Right.
blocks down the street, they
Right.
don't care.
We've got to go out, and if you haven't, it's going to take a long time of going out and drinking and families meeting and like
Exactly.
lots of
Barbecues
buddies
and-
happening before we even broach the subject of doing business together. And I think that's that way of doing business is foreign to a lot of Silicon Valley people. But you don't have to, as you've just mentioned, you don't have to drive very far
No.
to enter a world where that's the way of doing business, and to be cognizant of that is super important.
It's even true in Alameda. You just described Alameda.
Oh, really? Even Alameda, yeah. So I mean, a lot of tight-knit communities are like that, and I think from the tech world, we don't realize how much we're living in a bubble sometimes of like people who are just new adopters all the time, right? So
It's great.
all right, more questions. Do we have another question?
Yeah, I've got one. Coming out of tech, all right. So obviously, I believe that going forward in cannabis, the key entries for new companies are going to be in distribution, transportation, and security. That's where I'm putting all in my investment in. So my question to you guys is, where do you guys see the future of investment in cannabis going right now?
I would say there's not one area. We have a different strategy where we kind of bet on that and 5 or 10 other things, right?
I think the areas that you just identified, distribution, transportation, that kind of thing, there are some of the biggest problems in the industry lie in that. So when there's the biggest problems, you have the biggest upside potential, right? So we are actively looking for solutions that will help streamline that process. Some of it is reliant just on legalization occurring, right? Because with all these disparate entities like around California alone, determining how product can move in and out and through their jurisdictions makes it very difficult to do some of those solutions. People are starting to get behind it. There's the looming big distribution players that come from other industries that obviously know how to do it, and they're kind of like looking at the industry, waiting for it to free up enough to where they're confident to come in. Where else? I mean, you name it. This industry is wide open still. There's a lot of greenfield opportunities where solutions just haven't been created for people. And then there's kind of that conversion from version 1.0 to 2.0, where we're seeing a lot of new software come in, already unseating incumbents that have been in the space. And, seed to sale tracking is the best example of that. You could have said that, MJ Freeway and BioTrack and those companies are already in there. Like, why would you create something? They already, have a war chest of capital. Well, it's very clear that they are ripe for disruption.
They're not going to win, and that's obvious.
Yeah.
No matter who it is that does win, it's not going to be them.
Yeah.
Unless something changes. I want to answer your question from a high level though, because I'm just actually thinking in this like right now. But as you were asking the question, I was kind of thinking, what are the kind of from a really broad perspective? How do I look at the industry? And I think of kind of 3 categories. There's the first category is stuff that's I would call merely execution risk, and that's like basically all of the kind of infrastructure needed to make cannabis a real viable industry, right? That includes logistics and security and transport, like all that kind of stuff. It includes seed to sale tracking, right? It's all the stuff that any other industry has that it just needs to operate, right? And cannabis is lacking a lot of that stuff, right? And even the solutions that the cannabis industry has, as we just mentioned, I don't know how much we want to kick MJ Freeway while they're down, but like they don't work well, right? So you've got all these solutions that are there and they don't work well, and then in some cases there's not any solutions at all. And we talked about security yesterday as like a big issue. Banking is another issue, right? Like any kind of finance thing. There's all infrastructure. So there's that category to me. The second category to me is basically products, right? It's so as you've got all these new people coming in, the question's like, what products are going to take off? And I kind of think of it as CPG world, but it's not necessarily just CPG. It's pipes and what kind of flowers are going to be exciting to people, and any kind of devices, but also edibles and tinctures and anything else. And so there's kind of that whole CPG world, and I think that's interesting because you have so many new people coming into the industry suddenly, and there are different people, right? They're not the kind of industry veterans, right? They're people like, a 60-year-old housewife from Ohio who wants to try a topical. Like that's not historically cannabis, right?
That's not your typical customer.
Right. But they're starting to be, right? And so I think there's a whole world there. And then the third category, which I'm kind of just the geek part of me is really excited about, is kind of where cannabis can go from a kind of scientific blue ocean perspective, because a lot isn't understood about the plant. And so that could be ag tech stuff, but it could also just be pharmaceutical research and what other compounds are there and how can they be used, and what is there's an entourage effect, right? So what does anyone really understand that? No, right now the solution is, well, just use the whole plant. But it'd be nice if we understood why and what's going on, and there's a lot of anecdotal data about cannabis doing lots of things, but very little scientifically valid studies. So I think there's a whole. The train is going to answer also, but look, I think there's
he has a question of his own.
There's a whole industry there, which I think is probably longer term and way more capital intensive, right? That's the kind of thing where you spend $1 billion of research and in 10 years cure cancer, right? Whereas then there's kind of the lower hanging fruit, still difficult, of like CPG or kind of infrastructure stuff.
So I just want to point out that you kind of left out one of your favorite
Uh-oh.
categories or strategies.
I just made it up on the spot, so
I guess this is kind of an overarching strategy more than it is a category, but it's the companies that see cannabis as a good beachhead for launching and growing their company.
Yeah, I mean I would say that's more of an investment strategy and less of like what do I think about the cannabis industry. But yes, but we can get, actually that relates to what you and I talk about all the time, but not publicly a lot.
Fade to black.
In the long term, I don't, without like causing a bunch of pearl clutching and fainting, in the long term, I don't think there is going to be a cannabis industry, because cannabis is just an ingredient. And if we were actually a free market, there wouldn't be a cannabis industry. It would be another plant. Parts of it, sometimes it would be used pharmaceutically, sometimes it would be used recreationally, sometimes it would be used to make shirts and bags, and like, it would be used for lots of different things. It's an ingredient. It's an agricultural product that's complex. And so, my dream is to not have a cannabis industry, to just have cannabis be part of industry, right? And so at some point, Gateway as a cannabis fund and incubator is not necessary, right? Because the question isn't, are you doing anything with cannabis? It's like, what are you doing generally? Oh, are you making a new drug for epilepsy? Okay. Who cares if it has cannabis? I mean, great if it does, but that's not the definition of what you're doing.
That actually leads me into my second question. Now that you guys have 2 cohorts underneath your belt, have your criterion for new entrants changed any? Are you still looking for the same stuff that you guys looked at in November of 2015?
I mean, you know, by virtue of being an accelerator, we're pretty early stage, so our criteria was pretty simple. We basically stated that we had two filters. The first one being the founder. Like, are these people that we believe in? Are they people that believe in what they're doing and will stop at nothing to make it come to fruition? And is this concept scalable? And so, I mean, those are...
From that perspective, nothing's changed.
Yeah, nothing's changed.
Right.
Have we become more selective, or are we focusing on different areas? Maybe a little bit.
The beachhead thing, the cannabis as a beachhead
Yeah.
thing, absolutely. Right.
But I mean, it's just kind of, it's been fed to us by kind of like just, you know, experiencing the industry. And frankly, you know, the quality of founders that are entering the industry is becoming better and better. And so we are seeing better deal flow with every month that passes. And so, yeah, maybe our filters get a little bit more stringent. But that's just because we have better founders to choose from.
Yeah. I have nothing to add to that answer. It's an excellent answer. Yeah, sure.
I'd like to ask you guys a quick question. We just started actually involving ourselves in communities, kind of based on a cohort that you guys had, I think with the good guys, talking about your first time asking for money and how it wasn't really perhaps your greatest moment in life. You weren't prepared. So we took that to
I think
heart.
both of us fucked that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean you. Both of you guys
Sorry,
kind of
Stuart.
screwed that up. Yeah.
No, I'll take responsibility. I totally did. But I think Ben also did. Yeah.
But trying to learn from your guys' examples and the knowledge that you put forth, one of our big takeaways initially was you don't go for the ask right away, because you go for advice, you go for all these other strategies that you got us. So what we started to do was starting to insert ourselves into other communities besides the cannabis community. And so my question is, when we meet people and they ask us what we're doing and why we're here, and we're like, oh, so-and-so's here talking about how they raised $1 billion or built a 160,000 user website in a month. So we're there for a common reason together, but when they ask us what we do, we can certainly speak to our concept. My question ultimately is how much do you give, not about the concept, but, well, we're really here to meet people who can help us meet other people who can give us a lot of money.
Fair. So, that's a good question. There's a saying, I just want to touch on something you said really quickly. There is a kind of a common saying, which is you ask for advice and you get money, and you ask for money and you get advice. Right? It's cliche, but mostly true.
I ask for a lot of advice.
Yeah, fair. So there's a caveat to that, though, which is because I've fallen into that problem as well, where all I do is ask for advice, and then I'm like frustrated that money's not happening, and it's like, well, because I'm never asking for money, right? So you do eventually need to ask for money, and just to go down that path really quickly. I like to ask for advice in a way that naturally leads to being able to ask for money, which is like, I'll gloss over it really quickly, but like, hey, investor person, here's what I'm doing. Like, what do you think I need to do to make this investable, right? I need your advice on making this a great business to invest in. Like, if you go back and forth with them, assuming that you've built a rapport and they're kind of helping you out because they like you. At some point, if you can get them to say, like, yeah, this is investable now, like, it's a good business, like, guess what the next question is?
Right. Absolutely.
Right? It's like, great, will you write a check or, like, introduce me to other people? So you kind of need to lay the path there. Fundraising, though, is, like you're noticing, a lot of networking. It's just a lot of meeting people and 99 no's and 1 maybe, right? I mean, that's kind of what fundraising is. I would say that a lot of entrepreneurs, someone just posted this. Jonathan Grecian just posted this on Facebook like this morning or yesterday. Which
The Robinhood one?
No,
okay.
But he said, maybe it wasn't Jonathan, maybe it was Francisco Dow. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Someone posted it, and they basically said how most founders view startups, and it was like find funding, have success. Like step 1, find funding. Step 2, have success. Right. And so a lot of founders are very stuck in this idea that like all I need is money, and then like that's the thing stopping me. And I don't want to dismiss that, because sometimes that is the thing stopping you, absolutely. But most, even the real, I mean, you've read stories about this, I'm sure. Even really successful companies now, often they went through a grueling time of, Airbnb is the kind of classic example, right? A grueling time of no one wanting to give them money, no one believing them, and you kind of have to be able to build your business without any money, right? And until your business is, it's the frustrating thing as a founder is you got to build your business to the point where usually you have to build your business to the point where you don't actually need money, and then they want to give it to you, right? And that's frustrating, but that's almost the way it is. I mean, there's some exceptions, but I would really put really think about what investors are going to want to see, right? And what they want is, I know this is a really long rant, sorry. What they want generally is, early stage investing is risky. So what they want are things to take risk off the table, right? And that's generally what traction is. So finding a great team to work with you for free, like shows that you've convinced other people and you can build a team, getting people to use your product and come back and use your product and order more and like it, like showing all that kind of stuff, even if it's not profitable, is ways to kind of show traction. And that's the reason traction is a big deal for early stage investors, because it de-risks writing you a check, right? And one last thing I'll say is, and this is not aimed at you in particular, almost nothing turns investors off more than giving them a use of funds like model that shows you taking a big salary, right? So, like, it needs to be like, hey, I'm in this, I'm eating ramen until this is successful, Mr. Investor, right? Yeah. Once it is, I'm going to buy a corporate jet. But until then, I'm eating ramen, right? And that needs to be very clear.
So I just saw this post. Paul Graham was like, I've distilled it down to 2 words. What makes an investable founder? And it's relentlessly resourceful.
Yes.
And
I think I did see that the other day.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, that's pretty perfect.
Yeah.
And then Naval of AngelList recently said there was 3 things that he looks for. Resourcefulness was one of them. Integrity was the other one. And I think the other one had to do with kind of the relentlessness and grit. But it all kind of centers around that. They want to see that you're pushing this forward no matter what happens, that this is going to keep going. And if you can prove that and have multiple touch points, and they see that, oh, last time you talked to them, you were here, and now you're here, and you still haven't gotten money, it's like, oh. Well,
but you've improved?
Yeah. Maybe we should pour some gas on this flame and see what happens.
I feel like that was a super long answer, but I don't know if it was an answer. Was it an answer? Did it even answer your question?
It was an answer plus. It was awesome.
It answered your question. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe he just wanted to know what exactly to do in those situations where you're just networking.
Well, thank you, actually, because honestly, I loved where you took it. And it was really useful.
See, it wasn't an answer. I knew it wasn't actually an answer.
And such. But ultimately, like, not speaking to investors, but being in these situations where people are all in the group together because they want to learn something and they sort of want to network and they know these things, and then meeting the people in this room for the first time or not the first time, and then talking to them. And that's where I was going, like, oh, we're doing this, and of course we're all looking for money. That's why we're here. So
the one question like that always gets it to the next level for me is like, what can I do to help you?
I've been using that a lot lately.
That's
it's
like,
great.
I do this, you do this. Can I help you in any way? Oh, I can introduce you to this person, build some social capital there, cash it in later on down the road. I mean, it's classic for networking.
So no difference what we do in the cannabis industry and the other other industry.
Yeah, I mean that's what the Silicon Valley is built off of, right? People just introducing people to others that can help them further their company.
Yeah, I think is it Rajesh Sethi that has a rule that he tries to make 1 introduction a day at least. And it's like,
and then just to take that a step further, to show gratitude, like later on, like if someone made an introduction for you, to kind of go back and follow up and be like, hey, that really worked out for me, thank you. And it kind of helps build that rapport.
So yesterday we had a great conversation about Bitcoin.
Oh God.
So I wonder if you could talk, just a little bit about how viable Bitcoin might be for cannabis businesses, especially with the banking situation.
Well, I'm not a Bitcoin expert, so I'll start with that caveat.
Although moonlighting.
Lately, I've been researching it a lot, yes. First of all, it is volatile. It is relatively volatile. Bitcoin itself has been more stable lately. Some other altcoins are much more volatile. However, there is an entire Bitcoin economy that's happening. And I'm sure there's ways to I'm sure there's people that do things illegally, right? But there's ways to do it like completely above board. The IRS has given guidance on how to treat Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff. So you can do it above board. The advantage of something like Bitcoin is, we were talking about it in the context of carrying large amounts of cash around, right? Because, if you're carrying $250,000 of cash in your Honda Civic, just think about let's think about it just economically. Forget that there's thugs out there who just enjoy robbing people. It's worth $50,000 worth of a plan to rob $250,000 from you. Like, if I'm just thinking about it economically, like, okay, I could spend $100,000 on, equipment, surveillance, people, weapons. Still profitable, right? So the more money you're carrying, the more dangerous it is. And obviously, we're hoping that the banking situation will get rectified at some point. But cryptocurrency could potentially solve that, right? Because you could get paid in cryptocurrency. You can pay people in cryptocurrency. If we talk about Bitcoin in particular, it's relatively stable, kinda. And you can convert it back and forth to fiat currency very easily, right? And so you can get. I don't want to advertise the one on-ramp that I know because they're horrible. I think the other one is good, but I haven't tried it. I think it's called Gemini.
Is the one using Gemini? Yeah.
You use Gemini?
Yeah.
It's one that people recommend. But you fill out compliance data and stuff, and it's linked to your bank account, so the bank knows when you're buying cryptocurrency or pulling money out and selling it. It's a little bit cumbersome, right?
Okay.
That's the problem.
Can I go just very kind of poignant here?
Yeah, sure.
If you think that creating a very shallow cryptocurrency solution for cannabis, i.e. Potcoin, is a good idea, you're misled. So stop sending in applications pitching that. If there's two things that are high on the federal watch list, one is cannabis and the other is cryptocurrency. Right. And so you combine those two and you become like the point, like this nexus of just like getting shut down.
Right.
So it's deeper than that. Like, there are solutions that are coming down the road, and we've been saying this for a little while.
We can say we've invested in metal,
Yeah.
which is not just for cannabis companies, but should be a way to make it. The problem with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin generally is that it's, for non-technical people, it's not easy to do, right? It's like conceptually, just the idea of it. There actually isn't like people talk about Bitcoin. There isn't really a coin. There is no such thing as Bitcoin per se.
I got no Bitcoins on
right?
me.
It's like, it's just a ledger that's out in the internet that says who owes what to whom. So there's this, like conceptually, it's hard to wrap your head around if you're new to it, and certainly using it if you're new to it is a little bit difficult, right? So that's the only real problem with doing it, is that you've got to, we talked earlier about the cultivators not being new technology adopters. I don't know how the conversation for would you take Bitcoin goes, but probably not great, right? Maybe, or will you pay me in Bitcoin? Like maybe that would work, but it could be done. It's actually not that hard, and it could completely solve a lot of these problems where you got to carry large amounts of cash around. It's just a little cumbersome.
So one other thing that I'd like to bring up is there are a number of entrepreneurs when they come through and they're building their businesses. What they don't have access is the current statistics and basket rates. They're just building a product and hoping, that basically without seeing the physical numbers. And I'm wondering, are there any resources out there that are not, I've seen a lot and you have to pay for it, but are there any resources out there that entrepreneurs can use to find the statistics relative to, what their customer base is and what the sales
can
are?
I just make one real comment, and then hope is like the worst possible thing to build a business on. So, like maybe
Hope is not a
hope
strategy.
and change gets you elected, but it does not build a business. Now you can now comment more on that one.
All right. What I'd say is there are resources out there. How thorough they are and how reliable they are. New Frontier, BDS Analytics, Cannabis
We use
Reports, Brightfield, a Headset, you name it. People have
Headset
data.
doesn't have California data yet.
They don't. Neither does BDS, really. They do
Brightfield
cost.
doesn't. There's a version of Brightfield I think that's free. I'm not totally sure. I want to push Brightfield a little bit because their numbers are better and more professional than anyone else's by far. But they're not that different. So
here's what I would say though. Data is great. It's important to be analytical and build your story off of that. In cannabis, in particular, it is especially important because the industry is changing so quickly to get out there and talk to your customers. I mean, never has it been more important because what the future of the industry looks like doesn't necessarily replicate kind of the trajectory that it's been going at. So you need to have a thesis that is built both off the past and kind of what your vision of the future is. And you do that by getting out and doing customer development.
I want to underline your point just for a second because a lot of people think that the way to pitch their product or even to convince themselves it's a good business is to look at what the cannabis market is going to do. And that doesn't have any relation to your cannabis business, right? And to get to Ben's point that the past doesn't reflect the future, and actually circling back to my point earlier about CPG products, there's a whole blue ocean of stuff that just hasn't been tried. So, an example, I'm going to pick on Chris from Somatic, who's sitting over there. He made cold brew infused coffee. It basically didn't exist.
Yeah.
So he couldn't point to look at the demand for cold brew infused coffee. There is no demand
Look at
for
the
it.
less than 2%
He
market share of the
created
liquid
demand,
that.
right? He made an awesome product with awesome branding, and people fell in love with it and got it. I was going to use the word addicted, but I shouldn't. Very excited about it, right? And it's taking off. But the way to really test things is do your customer development and then try a little bit of it. Do some test market and see, hey, and maybe it's not the final product that's the way you want it, but see if kind of the general idea is appealing to people and if people are wanting to order it and they're liking it and they want more, they come back. Those are good signs.
And finally, if you're doing this in the vein of raising money, I can't tell you how many pitch decks we've seen that have market statistics on it. So if there's a section of your pitch deck or multiple sections that show that you've actually been out in the marketplace talking to people and testing your product, that is a lot more convincing, and those are the type of founders that show that kind of relentless resourcefulness that we're looking to invest in.
Yeah, it's better to show that 100 people love your product than 100,000 people could, right?
Right.
All right.
That was a fun one.
Yeah, that was good. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Jesse.
Hey, so yeah, I have a question. I have two questions. I'll start with one just to piggyback off the last conversation, a couple conversations ago. Basically, what should you what kind of return would look good to investors for a small business? I know it's kind of well, it depends on the business you have, but if you're asking for money, what's a general rule of thumb in terms of how much to offer back to them over what period of time? What looks good to people, and what can you expect without accepting too much money for a huge return back? Or you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That isn't really talked about a lot, and I guess for good reason. But I'm just wondering if there's some directions for people to keep in mind when they're asking.
This sounds
Yeah.
like a whole episode, but I
Yeah.
think we can try to squeeze it into 10 minutes here.
We should start by saying that our area of expertise is kind of venture scalable.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
businesses,
you
right?
combine two words that are almost like oil and water. You said small business and investor, in the right back to back. And so small business, lifestyle business, whatever you want to call it, they aren't bad businesses. They just aren't typically interesting to venture capital investors. Now, there are people that might put in money and take 50% of your business and help grow your small business together. It's just not our expertise, right?
Small business is still $21 million, right? That's
Sure, but that's not enough.
Yeah.
So that's here. Let's actually first define venture scalable business, and then that'll I think maybe frame the discussion a little bit. So when we talk about smaller businesses, you know what we mean. And the way that I like to describe this is actually based on a conversation I had with a guy at Steamboat Ventures a long time ago, and he's not the only one that has this attitude, but. So they've got a venture fund, right? I don't know how big their fund is, but let's just assume that's a $100 million fund, which is kind of a normal size for a venture fund, right? They're going to make maybe 20 bets. I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass, but let's say they make 20 bets on companies, right? Mm-hmm. Every single time they choose a company, that company has to have the potential to return their entire fund through that one investment, because they expect that 19 of those 20 will die, right? And they need to be able to return capital. So what that means is, if they're going to write $1 million check to you, and you're one of the 20 companies, or even a $5 million check, right? After dilution later on, because there's going to be more investors that come in, so maybe they start out owning, 10% of your company, and then they own 8%, and then they own 6% over time. Maybe eventually they end up at 5% of your company. Okay, that 5% needs to be worth $100 million, right? That's a big company, right? So that, like, investors that are doing kind of that early stage, like, venture and angel money are swinging for the fences, and they know they're swinging for the fences, which means, they're not going to go for something that they know is only ever going to get a single or a double. Because probably it won't, but if that's the one that wins, they're screwed, because they still didn't return their capital even though they picked well, right? So that's why they're looking for huge opportunities, right?
And this is venture capital where you're only seeing returns when there's a liquidity event, i.e. an IPO or a purchase or something like that.
Exactly. You're not seeing like dividends or anything else. Like your money's tied up for 10 years.
But there are investors that are interested in these kind of like high interest rate loans or dividends.
Right, but that's outside of the scope of what we're talking about. That's what I wanted to clarify, right? That stuff is not venture capital, right? That's like alternative financing stuff. To Ben's point, there are people who do that, right? I don't know if you want to talk about that more.
I mean, there's only so much I can say about it because I don't do it. I'm not the expert. But yeah, I mean, there are other alternatives out there, and that's what we always like to say. Venture capital, if you look at the amount of capital that is out there and how much of it is actually funneled through venture capital, it's a very small portion. So we are very much a niche of investment. But that being said, venture has a very big role in making sure that new innovation in companies come to life. So it's an interesting place to be, but it's what we specialize in.
Yeah, and so that other category of investors, they tend to be non-institutional, right? So you're not going down to Sand Hill Road and doing pitch decks to people. They tend to be wealthy individuals who, a lot of them maybe made their own money in a similar kind of business. Maybe they've got a dozen dry cleaners across the Bay Area, and they're making $15 million a year or whatever. I don't know what. I know nothing about the economics of dry cleaning. Maybe that's way too high. I don't know. But whatever. They're making some money. Like, it's like they were never really venture investors, but they did well for themselves, or they were real estate people, right? And those people tend to be, again, they tend to not be institutional, and they tend to be looking for something that maybe will give them some dividends, right? So I've made one investment like that, I think, I can't think of another one. I think I only made one. And it was a club. Like, it was like restaurant business, as Wes knows. It's horrible. But it was like, hey, we're going to give you you're going to invest this money, and we're going to give you kind of a percentage every quarter of revenue or profit, right? So, you're relying on them being successful, but, if it goes well, you're getting a check every quarter, and it's kind of a nice little annuity, and that's kind of what you're planning for as an investor. But those are not, those generally aren't angel groups. They're not venture capitalists. I don't actually know where to find them, so don't ask me. But actually, you know what? That's not true. I think Keiretsu Forum probably has some people like that. But yeah, they're out there. They probably know each other. I think real estate, especially in the Bay Area, real estate is a good place to start because there's a lot of people who made money in real estate by accident, and they're looking for little annuities and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All right. I mean, if it's all right, I'll start with the second question because it
Sure.
actually does well to your institution. So for people who are actually applying, then you guys sort of advertise yourselves as people that help people get from like beginning I know nothing stages to success. Skip number 1, go to step number 2, success. But I'm just wondering. It doesn't seem like it's really a case where someone knows nothing. It seems the case where they have a good idea, and I'm kind of wondering what beyond a good idea would you need to really be a strong candidate?
So I would actually push back a little bit and say you don't need the best idea.
A lot of ideas change in this process.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance, right? We don't mind people who don't know a bunch of stuff. That's fine. A lot of people, I don't know a bunch of stuff about a lot of things, right? And so we can help you with the stuff you don't know, right? Well, we can't help you be a better person. We can't help you be a better founder. We can't help you work harder and be more resourceful and more dedicated, right? We can't help you be smarter, right? So the number one screening criteria we have is basically the founder. Now, on top of that, there needs to be a business, right? It's a really bad idea is not, we'll just say, great, we like you, come back when you think of something better. But again, the really good founders don't generally come with just an idea and expect to get money and get into a program, right? They've done something. Maybe they've taken their business kind of as far as they can without some capital, and they've put some time in, some effort, and they've shown that there's kind of something real here, but they don't have the expertise or even the little bit of money to just kind of move it to that next level and really kind of start focusing on it. And so we do like to see something that they've done other than an idea, because it's free to do something other than it just takes time and effort. And if the founder's not putting in time and effort, it's a bad sign.
So there's kind of two characteristics that I would like put this in, and one of them that we use is intelligence. And when we say intelligence, it doesn't mean IQ necessarily, although there is kind of a baseline IQ. That's a whole nother discussion.
We can have a psychometrics show sometime.
Right. But when we're talking intelligence, it's how you look at the world, how you look at information, how you're kind of being analytical about your company. If you can prove that you're thinking intelligently about like what you're doing instead of just pure passion, that does help a lot. And the other thing I would say is because we're early stage, we understand that people will have different strengths and weaknesses, right? But if they have a special strength that makes them unique, that makes them look at the world in a different way, that's what we kind of find endearing. And so if you have kind of an astrophysicist or a biochemist or a food scientist that's coming in and they're like, I have this part of my product super figured out. I'm intelligent enough to understand that I don't know the business side or fundraising all that well. That's why I need you guys. And having kind of that self-awareness, that's what's super important. And so that's when we can help. When people are self-aware and they're coachable, it's very easy for us to jump in and either backfill it ourselves or link them up with a great packaging designer so that their product can shine for what it truly is. That's what's easy.
Cool. All right. Are we? We spent almost the entire hour? Michael's giving me a weird face.
He's like,
okay. There's no more face. Are there any other urgent, quick questions we could do? Are we good? Princessa, you're in charge. Just tell us when it's over.
We have 4 minutes. I think we're
All right, we're good.
We're
Good.
gonna wrap that up.
Yeah, thanks. This went well, guys. Thank you for
Yeah,
this.
thank
Was
you.
good.
Awesome.
Catch us next week at 10 a.m. on Fridays
Yeah. Who do we
on
have
Facebook.
on next week,
Yeah.
Michael?
No one knows. Wait. Is it on?
Is it Emily? Or Poseidon.
It's Emily and Morgan.
Emily
next
and
week.
Morgan from Poseidon are going to be on next week.
It's not on the calendar, but yes. Okay.
You know, one of the more prolific investment funds in the industry.
Absolutely, and one of the ones that people know
Yeah.
most.
And just all around nice, friendly people with
Yeah.
integrity, which is not always easy to find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, anyone looking to raise money,
Yeah.
come sit in the audience next week.
Right.
Ask for advice from Emily and Morgan.
Ask for advice. Thank you, everyone. Join us next week. Hit us up on social media if you have any questions beforehand, and we'll get you on the air. Thanks a lot, and see you then.
Thanks.